Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's Video Podcast. As I said last week, what I'm going to do this week, I'm going to do Chapter 1 of Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny. And let's throw it over there for a second. That's what the book looks like, and it's a graphic novel or graphic edition with the illustrations done by Nora Krug of Timothy Snyder's work that he did a few years ago. It was originally a little tiny book, and then they just issued this new version with marvelous pictures in it, and it'll keep you interested. It's really well done. Get a copy. It's really well done, worthwhile having, and you can use it as a reference. A lot of information in there that you're not necessarily all familiar with. The first chapter in the book is well, let's get the first chapter. We'll put it up here. The first chapter is "Do not obey in advance." Do not obey in advance. And what the header says here, it says, "Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. Individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want, and then offer themselves without being asked." They offer themselves without being asked. And I'll keep it, try to put it up on the side there for a minute and see if it shows up. If it doesn't, then I'll just, well, it doesn't seem to be popping, so let's just get rid of it entirely. Okay, before I get into it, let me make a correction from last week. I mentioned Sonia Sotomayor last week, and I think I really scrambled her name around. And I was talking about the fact that she's a Supreme Court justice who spoke out against Roe versus Wade being overturned last week, and she was really upset about it. And I brought this up when I was talking about feminism last week, and I just absolutely mashed her name up. It's Sonia Sotomayor. She's been a Supreme Court justice since 2009. The other name that I'm going to use a few times here is, in fact, I'll put her picture up too. One of my real heroines. This is Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt. The title says "The Philosopher in Dark Times." She's sitting there like everybody did in the 40s and 50s, smoking a cigarette and looking very thoughtful. I have her up as a screensaver on my upstairs computer. And I am not the best one for pronouncing things properly, and I've always called her Hannah Arendt. It's not. It's Hannah Arendt. The R is rolled, and the R-E-N-T is pronounced like rent. So her name is Hannah Arendt. Interestingly, she's one. I think I put this up also. Her famous book is "The Origins of Totalitarianism." It's a 500-page definitive analysis of totalitarianism, which erupted throughout Europe. She was a student of Heidegger back in Germany, and or in Europe, and she was a student of Heidegger, and Heidegger's internationally famous philosopher. Well, she comes along, and she's quite a bright student, and immediately the two of them fell in love and in lust, and they wound up having a torrid affair for a little while. He was married with 2 kids, and she was this brilliant student that she was having the affair with. He wound up leaving and going to Germany and becoming a Nazi. She wound up going to Paris, and she spent her time in France, and she basically wrote against the Nazis and has written this book here, which is the analysis of it. They remained, the torrid affair was over, but they remained in touch with each other, and they remained sort of intimately involved intellectually, if not nothing else, over the years. And interestingly, I believe Heidegger is known as a somewhat of an existentialist, and I believe he's known a bit as a Christian existentialist. I'm going to double check that. I believe I remember that from old philosophy classes years ago. And it seems shocking that you could have a Christian existentialist becoming a Nazi, but when you consider the Pope, who was around during the era of the Nazis, also was siding with the Nazis, it's not that far-fetched. So anyway, that was a little correction. Hannah Arendt. I love that woman there. Okay, the opening chapter here, and let me put the picture back up on the chapter. Where are we? right here. Okay, so this is the do not obey in advance, and you'll notice the graphic here. There's a woman with a hammer and chisel, and what she's doing is she's making statues of the guy who's laying there in the hammock. So she's much like Hitler was putting his pictures and his symbols all over the country. She's just there in the woods in Germany, there making statues that look like the guy that's in the hammock. So she's doing what they want them to do. She's just automatically doing what they want, what they would like people to do. So the chapter opens with a riff here. It says, "Anticipatory obedience is a political tragedy." After the German elections in 1932, when Hitler formed the government, and the Czechs elections in 1946, when the communists were victorious, in both cases, enough people voluntarily extended their services to the new leaders. Nazis and communists alike realized that they could move quickly toward a full regime change. The first heedless acts of conformity could not be reversed. Once they started to go along with it, you couldn't stop it from happening. Because once a few went, then a lot more started to go with it. Historically, here I'm going to jump back here. Historically, it's 1938, and the Germans annexed Austria. Now, the Austrian chancellor was a little conflicted, and there were a lot of pro-German people in Austria at the time, and there was a lot of sentiment towards the Nazis. And in either case, Germany annexed Austria, and Austria went along with it. So that was in March of 1938. And then in September of 1938, just a few months later, Hitler wants to annex the Sudetenland, which is in Czechoslovakia. And it's a portion of Czechoslovakia which has got a lot of Germans in it. But the Czechoslovakian government didn't want to do it at all. And this is when Neville Chamberlain comes in the famous Munich Agreement. So Neville Chamberlain meets with Hitler in Munich, along with Mussolini, the heads of France, the heads of Italy. Nobody from Czechoslovakia was there. And Neville Chamberlain was doing anything he could to maintain peace. And he really felt like he could have an agreement with Hitler. A little delusional, maybe. Now, interestingly, there is a new movie that's on Netflix right now, which is historically just spot on. And it's called The Edge of War, and Jeremy Irons plays Neville Chamberlain. Now, I've always historically known the sort of catchphrase that Chamberlain capitulated to the Nazis early on. So what's happening is they see that Hitler has, annexed Austria, that he wants this piece of the Sudetenland, which is in Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain feels like he can have a deal with Hitler, and that Hitler is not going to want any more land. He's not going to go to try to grab any other territories. Well, while this is happening, the movie is about these two individuals who were at Oxford together. One is a German who was at Oxford, and the other one is a Brit. Well, the German is very much anti-Hitler and is involved with the movement to take Hitler down. But the fact that this Munich, that they're going to meet in Munich, sort of brings things to a sudden halt. So the German nationalist has these papers that Hitler wrote, where he talks about how he wants to march across Europe and take all the rest of his land. So what the whole show is about, it's about how he meets with the British guy who comes over, who's an aide to Chamberlain. And these two younger guys get together. The papers go back and forth, and there's a meeting arranged so that the young German guy can meet with Chamberlain, give him the papers, and present to him the facts so that Chamberlain doesn't sign an agreement with Hitler. But as we know, he does sign the agreement with Hitler. Not only does he sign the agreement with Hitler, Chamberlain then goes on to write up his own little agreement, which is not enforceable on any level, where he reiterates all the promises that Hitler made to him at the meeting. It was very odd that there was this meeting with these complete heads of state at this time. So Hitler kept saying all these things he's going to do, anything to placate Chamberlain. And Chamberlain writes them all down, puts them into a document. The next day he meets with Hitler. Would you please sign this? Sure, I'll sign it. What do you want me to sign? I'll sign it. And Hitler gets sort of annoyed that Chamberlain is getting more press out of this. It reminded me very much of Trump getting jealous of somebody else getting better press out of an event that gets organized. So there's a lot of analogies that you can make to current times between Hitler and Trump, between, let's say, people that were at the insurrection on January 6th. There were hundreds of people, maybe 1,000, I don't know, who did not go into the Capitol, but they stayed in the background there. They were there at the rally. They marched down to the Capitol, but they didn't go into the Capitol. They weren't part of the group that was, pepper spraying and taking batons and beating people with them and trying to take the guns from the police and shooting them or any of this. They stayed in the background and watched it happen. Now, they all feel like they were good citizens. I don't particularly feel that way. If you're standing there and you're watching somebody getting beaten to death, you certainly ought to take some responsibility and get in there and stop that action going on. In the two interesting things pop up here. The acquiescence of the people. Well, in Austria, and this is a picture from the book. This is a picture in the book here, and we see in 38, so Hitler's in power, and Austria is now basically the Austrians, what they're calling anticipatory obedience. They decided the fate of the Austrian Jews. Local Austrians captured Jews and forced them to scrub the streets to remove symbols of an independent Austria. They forced them to remove symbols of an independent Austria. So this was a picture, an actual photograph that was taken at the time. And in the movie, The Edge of War with Jeremy Irons, they showed this happening. The young men are walking through Austria, and they're passing a theater, and there's a group of people outside, and they've got people scrubbing the streets, getting rid of these symbols of an independent Austria. Can't make it up. You can't make it up. Okay, reading on here a little bit. We go, when this was going on, Hannah Arendt, in her book here that I showed you before, The Origins of Totalitarianism, the quote in her book is, she remembers when the German troops invaded the country and the Gentile neighbors started riots at Jewish homes. Austrian Jews began to commit suicide. So as the Nazis came into the country, the Gentile, the Christian neighbors of the Jews, started raiding their homes. Because this is what was going on throughout Germany and now Austria and then Poland, all these places. And Austrian Jews started to commit suicide. A few years later, in 1941, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, the SS took the initiative on their own to devise the methods of mass killing without orders directly to do so. They guessed what their superiors wanted, and they demonstrated what was possible. It was far more than Hitler even thought could have possibly happened. So this is what we're calling obeying in advance and sort of going along with whatever's happening. Interestingly, a Yale psychologist, this is all in the book here, chapter 1. A Yale psychologist, Stanley Milgram, wanted to show that there was a particular authoritarian personality. So he wanted to go into Germany and do these studies to explain how these Germans went along with this kind of thing. But he couldn't get permission to do the studies in Germany. So it's 1961, right at the same time that Adolf Eichmann is being tried in Jerusalem for his part in the Nazi Holocaust. 1961, Stanley Milgram conducts these studies at Yale University. And what he does is he gets a group of people together, he gets a scheme together, and he has these people in the room, he's got wires attached to them, and the people that are, and people in the other room are going to be applying electric shocks to these other people. Well, they're not really going to get electric shocks. They're going to act it out. So they're part of the scheme. The people that are applying the electric shocks are the main people that we're observing here. And they kept telling them to apply more shocks. And people were screaming, writhing in pain. In a couple of cases, a couple of people appeared dead. Nobody in the study ever stopped doing what they were told to do. None of them ever stopped doing what they were told to do. And a lot of people left without even inquiring about the health of the people that were involved in the study. Milgram concluded that people are remarkably receptive to new rules in a new setting if they are instructed to by a new authority. After this, he said he hardly saw any reason to take the experiment back to Germany. He had done it in Connecticut, and it seemed to work. So it wasn't just a German mindset, it was a human mindset. A human mindset. And it's very much in front of us today. As we read the papers every day, what's going on with Ukraine sounds very similar to what was going on in Europe in the early stages of World War II. The Russians right now, they've got ships going off the coast of Ireland. They look like they're getting ready to cut a cable which would shut the communication off throughout Europe. They've got hundreds of thousands of troops amassed on the border. Germany is not real anxious to jump into the fray here, which just came out in the paper, in the news today. And Putin is just pushing, see how far he can get. So exactly what's going to happen here, we don't know. But interestingly, there was a major op-ed in the paper today talking about how the climate change is affecting things in Russia that could have more of a devastating effect on Russia than anything else going on. And that's sort of an aside to this thing. All right, I'm going to wrap it up right there, but I wanted to end with a little quote from the movie The Edge of War. I think we covered everything I wanted to get over here. I've said earlier, Tom Hartman, a famous statement Tom Hartman makes at the end of his show every night is, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy is not a spectator sport. In The Edge of War, the British guy winds up going back home to the wife, and the wife talks about hope, and he reiterates a quote that his German friend said to him before he left for home. Hoping is waiting for somebody else to do it. Hoping is waiting for somebody else to do it. We'd all be much better off without it. We don't choose the lives we live in. We only choose how we react. We don't choose the lives we live in. We choose how we react. Peace, patience, persistence. We'll get the second show up next week with Chapter 2. Title on Chapter 2 is Defend Institutions.